I'm an Australian guy living here in Belarus, and I'm currently in the city of Grodno. And Grodno is in the far west of Belarus, right near the borders of Poland and Lithuania. And I have to tell you, this place does not feel like Belarus. And it's not just the architecture. Yeah, it's still got that kind of more European feel about some of the architecture, but it's not just that. It's the people. The city of Grodno was formally founded in the early 12th century, and pretty much the next 600 years was spent under either Lithuanian rule or under Lithuanian Polish Commonwealth rule. The Russians then came in, the Russian Empire in the late 18th century, took over for 100 or so years, and then in the early 20th century was again some changes in power until the Nazi Germans arrived. Now when they arrived in 1941, the ethnic makeup of this city was predominantly Polish, right? So 60% Polish and about 25% Jew, and then 15% kind of miscellaneous and mixed and so forth. Now, as you could imagine, the Germans came in, they executed all the Jews, and shortly after, well, 3 years after, the Soviet Union came in and they tried to take control, and after some kind of resistance, they then took over Grodno. At this point, Polish people fled either back to Poland or they were dispersed throughout the Soviet Union. So the ethnic makeup changed entirely. It went from 60% Poles, 25% Jews, to about 60% Belarusian ethnic and around 25% Polish ethnic. And this history makes a lot of sense to me because I feel the people here, they feel a bit more Polish. They feel a bit more Lithuanian. They feel a bit more European. That's the feeling here. They don't have that kind of Sovietsky feel. And I contrast Grodno here with another city that's in Belarus called Gomel. And Gomel is the second biggest city in Belarus. Now Gomel is pinned on the other side of Belarus. So Grodno's on the far west side, right next to Poland and Lithuania obviously, whereas Gomel is nestled up against the Ukrainian border, not too far from Kiev actually. And I have to say that comparing Grodno to Gomel is like comparing apples to oranges. I mean, they literally feel like different civilizations. Again, Grodno, the people here are a lot more warm, they're a lot more open, they're a lot more Western. They look a lot more Western, they're all styled more in Western clothes. I feel like I'm in Vilnius. Whereas in Gomel, people were a bit more closed. I got more of a Sovietsky kind of feel there. It almost felt like the Belarusian equivalent of Siberia. That's kind of how it felt there. People were a lot more closed, not as open to foreigners. Здравствуйте. О чем приятно?
English. Английский.
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 Говоришь по-английски?
Английский.
Да.
Ну, номер самого, номер. Хороший человек. Снимай.
So you told you.
Да, я нормальный.
Whereas Gomel had a really different feel. It kind of felt like, more like in the Soviet Union. It had this kind of Sovietsky feel about it. The attitude and inclination of people there was a lot different to how it is here in Grodno. So they're not as open to foreigners, just not really interested in what's going on around them. They're really just kind of running their own race over there. And it just gave me that feeling of this is probably what it was like in the Soviet Union. People didn't really trust each other much because you don't know who's a spy and who's going to lag you into the government or blah, 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 blah. So you kind of kept to yourself and you weren't really open to people. And that's why I think a lot of people in Russia, for example, they tend to be very, very cold at the start and even disingenuous at times. But once they kind of open up and become warm, they can be very, very good friends. And this was a feeling I kind of got in Gomel. Now, I wasn't there for a very long time, but a lot of signals were kind of telling me this. And again, so Gomel and Grodno, they kind of feel like different civilizations. I really want to show you this cathedral. So this cathedral is more than 300 years old. It started off as a Jesuit cathedral and then it was taken over by the Roman Catholics, and it's now called St. Francis Xavier Cathedral. It's about 50 meters high, and I can't even imagine how in the late 17th century, just how laborious that must have been, how dangerous it must have been to build this, get such a high and impressive structure. I hope you can really tell on camera just how kind of imposing it is, and it's really quite beautiful. It did take them some 27 years to make. Now, of course, during this time, there were a couple of wars on in the region which kind of halted progress, but nonetheless, 27 years in the making. Now, of course, when the Soviets came in, as you know probably, that Marxist ideology is very anti-religion. They see it as stupid and that the only thing that really matters in the world is the class struggle, comrades. And as a result, of course, they closed this place down for about 27 years. And it kind of opened up again just as the Soviet Union was ending and things were kind of freeing up internally and more kind of local control were given to different regions within the Soviet Union. This place opened up again and started giving official services. Give you a little bit of close up here. Let's see some of the detail on this kind of impressive monument or cathedral, should I say. And apparently this clock is one of the oldest working clocks in Europe. You can see there it's around 12:30. You can kind of make out the hands there and the beautiful detail on top with that kind of light blue paint there. Looks really, really nice. I'll take you for a little bit of a walk now. We'll go through what is called Soviet Square here, and then we'll take a right into Soviet Street. It's probably difficult for people in the West to imagine that these names have been retained. I find it really interesting that these names have been retained and that this is Soviet Square that I'm currently in. And again, Soviet Street, it's kind of the main tourist street here in Grodno. It's a lovely little cobbled street with lots of cafes and so on and so forth. Very typical of an old town. It's not actually old town, is my understanding, but it feels like that typical European old town. You know how they kind of, most old towns feel quite similar, right? They've got that same kind of feel about them. Obviously similar eras, similar architecture and so forth. So walk up here a little bit. It's around lunchtime, so you got a few people wandering around looking for some food, just hanging out and seeing what's up. I won't talk too much as I walk down. I'll just show you some of the sights. You can see for yourself that this place and the people here do just kind of look more, that kind of American grunge feel, especially the youth, the sub-25s. They really have abandoned, a lot of them have abandoned that kind of more Soviet kind of look, which is still quite prevalent, that really ultra-feminine Soviet look, which is still very prevalent in Minsk and a lot of other small towns for that matter, or smaller cities, should I say, in Belarus. But here in Grodno, a lot less so. There's a lot more of that, again, that American grunge feeling here. Certainly, again, amongst the sub-25s anyway. So you've got a good range of people here. I like a lot of the detail on these buildings. Really beautiful. So these are window covers. Got a guy paying us some tunes here. His harmonica. Здравствуйте. Giving us a nice vibe. Actually quite touristy, Grodno. Grodno and Brest are probably the two largest cities that are best known for tourism. And their visa system was a lot more open. You could actually come to this region without following the official Belarusian visa system. I think from 2016 or 17 they made this kind of 10-day visa thing just to the Grodno region here. And it's got a lot of tourists. Like, I haven't seen many tourists in Minsk or many of the other cities I've been to, but here I've seen quite a few tourists, kind of middle-aged couples with a camera walking around taking photos, presumably from Poland or the Baltics. Again, this is literally, I'm pretty sure the borders are around 15 to 30 kilometers away, so it's really nestled in right against the countries of Poland and Lithuania, which of course both in the European Union. Got a nice Kino theatre here. Kino theatre. Obviously where they're playing movies. see, if you can't read all this stuff, it's bar, kino theatre, cafe, etc. You can see the effect of the American culture here, whatever this is. Dance studio, you can see that effect. That kind of Russian rap feel, actually, in this case. If you're not aware, Russian rap is a bit of a thing. A lot of the youth in Belarus are into it. You hear it quite a lot in Yandexes, actually. Younger guys playing it or driving a Yandex. Yandex being, of course, the Uber equivalent, or Bolt or Grab, depending on where you are in the world. Ride-sharing application. Just move out onto the road here. You guys are good, so look at it. So yeah, it's very beautiful. Certainly very picturesque. I remember when I went to Gomel, which is probably the roughest place I've been. Roughest just in terms of least touristy place I've been. And some local people are saying, "Why on earth are you going to Gomel?" And I quite like Gomel. I think their park is spectacular. It's quite an interesting place in its own right, and I enjoyed my time there. But everyone's just like, the locals are like, "What'd you go there for? Why didn't you go to Grodno? Why didn't you go to Brest? Like, what's wrong with your brain?" This guy on the bike reminds me that I haven't seen a lot of transport, like solo unmotorized transport or low-level motorized transport here in Minsk. Bicycles are very popular. Electric scooters are just the thing. You don't really see them much here in Grodno. And of course, in smaller towns that you go to, if you go to a smaller town with, say, just a few thousand people, what you see a lot is bicycles. Bicycles become a very standard way of getting around. Even babushkas will be riding a bicycle sometimes to get around with. Getting towards the end here, I'm actually going to take you up. We're going to go to the right up here. I'll take you up to the park, and there's a lot of another Lenin statue. Seems that every city in Belarus has a big, whopping big Lenin statue. It's crazy to think, but yeah, they're all still kind of up as far as I know, and they're very prolific, which I find kind of interesting. It's how prolific Lenin statues are through Belarus. Good old hot fix, 2.6 ruble coffees. Hello, it's $1. That would be considered cheap here for a coffee. If you were to go to a normal sit-down cafe, you're probably paying somewhere around, it depends where you are, but 4 to maybe 8 rubles for a cappuccino or cappuccino is roughly what you'd pay. So Hot Fix is a pretty kind of cool young person's cheap coffee place, good variety of flavors. Coffix is another good example of that. Quite cheap, aimed at the younger market with a lot of innovation in their coffees and teas. It's very seasonal, of course. We're just coming out of summer, so you've got your iced latte. Now moving into winter, we start getting lemon imber chai, lemon and ginger tea. There's some electric scooters there. Again, I don't see anyone actually using them, and of course, this is probably not the best thing to to go on with electric scooters. Not only is it obviously kind of bumpy, as you can see, but also kind of wavy as well, so it can be quite unstable to go at any decent rate on. There's another bicycle. So we'll go up here. I just noticed yesterday I was wandering around, there was a Lenin statue as well as a really big park. So I'll show you these. I figure at this stage of the video, if you're still watching, you're obviously just enjoying having a bit of a look around, and I'm just walking around exploring a bit, so I might as well just keep you on here and keep talking around what's going on. Quite a bit of foot traffic around today. I think it is lunchtime, so yeah, people are out doing a bit of banking, finding some food, finding their friends to have a coffee with. There's Apteka, which is the absolute pharmacy of choice in Belarus. You feel like there's not a block without an Apteka. They are absolutely everywhere. Oh, we got some bad luck. Uh-oh. So traditionally, people in this part of the world have been very superstitious. That's kind of changing a little bit, but yeah, traditionally there's been a lot of superstitions deeply held in this part of the world. I guess it has been kind of everywhere to an extent, but probably still a bit more prevalent here than in the West, but as I say, kind of dying off as well. There's a big park over here. As I always mention, one of the hallmarks of the Soviet planned cities was having these big parks, which is one of the few and rare bonuses, or positives should I say, of that kind of centrally planned idea. They really pushed the park there. As they were pushing out the church, as I mentioned earlier, they pushed back in the park. So this big open square here, and of course there's the great man, if you want to call him that. Says there Lenin, and it's a pretty big statue. I would say that it would be, the base there is probably 5 meters. So you can see the lady walking kind of next to it there. Let's zoom in on them. See the lady walking there, so it gives you a sense of how big it is. And these Lenin statues are always really big. They're always really big. That's one thing about them. Let's take you over to the park here. Let's have a bit of a look, see how it's landscaped, how big it is, what there is inside. Usually a little river or kind of creek running through. Usually not, for fairly obvious reasons, a lake or pond. But yeah, usually some kind of water running through there. Let's have a look. The dog trying to scratch himself with the thing on there. Oh, torture. Electric bus system there, running off electricity. All right, 2, 1, and we can walk. A pishkom. Not exactly sure where the entrance is here. We'll turn left. Let's navigate past this lady. Turn left and see if we can get in there. Very typical. A little bit of again, that kind of little bit of running water there. Kind of creaky, kind of little mini river stream, probably the best word for it. It's funny when you live in a country and you don't always speak English. It's interesting how both your vocabulary shrinks and also your grammar deteriorates. I don't know if you've experienced this before, but I'm finding this here. Sometimes I can't quite find the right word and I mix my grammar quite a bit actually. This is interesting. The usual abundance of seats. There's always so many seats in these parks. Lots of places to sit down, and as I've mentioned in previous videos, it's really the park was created as the town square in these kind of Soviet designed cities. Obviously some kind of festival coming up here in the near future. a mixture of city and country colours there. Definitely got a lot of country colours there. Ah, beautiful. Always on the lookout for the Ja lublю город. Insert город. So I love Grodno. There it is. See the word theatre? Can't quite make out the second word there. My eyes aren't good enough. Theatre. Lagic? Can't quite read it there. And as always, there's a real mixture. So you notice there was a few girls on the thing there, a couple of guys here walking, a couple of babushkas there walking, couple. Down there was a lady with a pram walking around. You really see how the whole community embraces the park. Whereas you tend to find in the West, especially larger cities, that people kind of split up into groups, you know, like old people will stay in a certain area, young people in a certain area, families in a certain area. You don't have this same kind of mixing that you might in Belarus. You still get that sense of kind of intergenerational connectivity to some extent. At least on the surface, you'll often see 3 generations walking together or hanging out together. So let's head up here. Looks like we've got some infrastructure, some kind of looks like a little kvass or beer garden there. Maybe some kids games or something. It's quite common to have some kids rides and this kind of stuff in the park, like kind of like a festival kind of version, not just like a seesaw or a swing, but actual full Sovietsky festival type equipment, like merry-go-rounds and this kind of stuff. A lot of it's in pretty original condition. Good examples, Gorky Park back in Minsk, actually. They have quite extensive playground equipment like this. Again, not just like a normal playground with a little bit of a swing and a slide, but full size that you'd find at a festival or show. This says Tir. I'm not sure what's in there. Pretty typical place to drink a beer or some kvass. A beautiful warm afternoon. So I'm not sure what we'll find. You haven't actually walked in this park before, so we'll just kind of wander through, see what we get. And sure enough, I was just mentioning the kids' equipment, and there you see a lot of that larger scale Soviet era kids' equipment. We'll walk down there. Oh wow, this park is humongous. Wow, really big. Wow, incredible actual graffiti. I haven't seen graffiti since I last left Belarus, which was about 4 months ago. You just don't see it at all. Because kids just behave. You haven't got this kind of try-hard teenage rebellion crap. Kids just behave. And are kind of responsible here. So you just don't get this kind of crap around Belarus. Or very, very rarely do you get it. I'll take off my cranky old man hat. And, oh wow. I wish I knew what this was. Cocktails and ice cream. And shawarma. Back through my backlog there, see some of the longer videos. The ones are like, 20, 30, 40 minutes where I've obviously just done a little bit of a video and then just thought, you know what, I'll just walk around for you guys. Just Spider-Man action there. Here's another shawarma and burger place. Shawarma burger. Alright, let's head back this way. I'm getting a bit hungry actually, wouldn't mind a bit of shawarma or burger action. Looks like mum with her two daughters here. A bit of a laugh. So they're all landscaped in the same way. One thing I noticed is they were generally very efficient in their landscaping. So it's just grass and trees. So it doesn't need a lot of upkeep. You do get some pretty intricate landscaping sometimes with flower beds and the like, but for the most part, they kept it pretty simple. Grass and trees and seeds. So when you've got like this, when you've got vending machines out in public like this, it kind of tells you something about the society. I first noticed this in Japan, like, 2005 or something, when I spent some time in Japan. I first noticed this. So look at some of the old characters there. Just randomly on the street, and I was like, geez, if you just had a vending machine, obviously this is in a park, and to steal this would be quite a logistical exercise. You have to somehow get the car in here, I'm not sure how, but in Japan, I remember seeing one just on the side street. I'm like, that's so weird. And I'm thinking through, why is that so weird to me to see it there? Why is it unusual? And why haven't I seen it in Australia? And I think, well, in Australia, I think it would just get stolen. I think someone would just back up the ute or van and just kind of take it. So the fact that it's just kind of out here in public and stealable, it kind of shows you a bit about Belarus, that you don't really get a lot of crime here. In fact, you get very little. I'm sure you've heard me say this before, but if you haven't, Belarus is one of the lowest crime countries in the world, easily. And it kind of, it's one of many countries that puts the lie of incomes creating crime. It's a bit of a Marxist lie, this one. Once you start to account for culture in any way, you see any kind of relationship between low income and high crime disappears once you account for culture. So for example, if you actually plot on a graph crime and inequality, for example, you'll see a pretty close correlation. But when you actually separate these countries into continents, you see that this correlation disappears entirely. So in other words, crime is a cultural phenomenon. It's a cultural phenomenon, not an economic one. Now, obviously if you're starving, okay, that's different. But, no one in Europe's starving. Compared to even 20 years ago, very few people around the world are starving. I mean, I know actually just to share some personal details about me, that was my first connection to Australia. Was my 7X great-grandfather stole some hair combs in London. I was in London, stole some hair combs, so I'm quarter British. He stole these hair combs in London and then of course got deported, thrown on a ship. Go to Australia, you mongrel bastard. And he did. And joke's on them, because now Australia's probably a better place to live than is Britain. No offence to the Brits watching, but at the very least we just have better weather and don't complain as much. Let's walk up this way. Although, the Brits are alright. No one dislikes the Brits, right? They're kind of like Australians in that way. Most people kind of like them. They're generally pretty likeable. They're a bit wacky. Their sense of humour is a bit fucking whack for me. I just swear, there's my monetisation again. Their sense of humour is a bit unusual for me. I don't really jive with it much. Let's just take a left here and walk past this rather sizable monument. This is probably some kind of independence monument, independence/war recognition of fallen Belarusian men in wars gone past. No doubt it is. See if I can go in the front and work out. I can see you can see the dates there. So this would be for all the men that died in World War II. If you didn't know, I need to look up the exact figures on this. I might do a video on it actually. But I've been told anecdotally from a lot of Belarusians that pretty much every able-bodied man was killed in World War II, which in itself is just a tragedy to have that scale of death in a civilization. It's horrific, obviously, but what comes out of that is, how does a civilization survive when you've got almost entirely women, or boys, women, and maybe older men who didn't go to war? And that gives you a lot of an insight into how Belarus, this culture, has evolved in the last 100 years. That one event, as significant as it is, certainly has had a big impact on the culture here. And I'll explain that in another video. I think I've mentioned it a few times before, but I'm fully aware, even if you're like addicted to my videos, even if you're binge watching, you're not going to watch all my videos, right? Even my closest friends who live here with me, discuss my videos and give me ideas and give me feedback and stuff. And even they're not watching all of them. So I don't expect you to watch all of them, but if you watched a few, you'll notice that I repeat myself on a couple of topics. One of them is the low crime here. One of them is this World War II situation and what that kind of did for the culture going forward from that point. So I don't want to repeat myself too much, but again, I'm very aware that even if you're a subscriber and you've been watching a lot of my content, you probably haven't still heard me say these things. So let's leave the park now. I'll try to go a different way home. Let's see what I can work out without using Google Maps. We're back to the love Grodno sign. I do quite like these signs. I don't know why. They're kind of cheesy, but I kind of like them. Even like the I Heart Dana Mall sign in Minsk. It's a bit sad. I like it. Let's go back out on the road here. It's an actual footpath bike lane here. I assume it's a bike lane. It's one thing I notice in Minsk that I don't really like is that the bikes and the electric scooters all go on the footpath, which I understand it's for the safety away from cars, but of course they create their own safety hazard for pedestrians. It's kind of annoying, but I guess it can't be perfect. I mean, I remember, I think it was Amsterdam, where they have the clear 3 lanes, and even in Australia, actually quite a few Western countries, they have this kind of 3-lane approach, car, bike and footpath. But yeah, it's not a big deal either way, right? Just being a grumpy old man. Alright, I reckon I'll say goodbye to you guys. If you enjoyed the content, do let me know. Give me a like. If you made it all this way, so this individual clips up to 30 minutes, so the whole video is probably around 35 minutes or something. If you've made it this far, pretty good friggin' effort. Give me a like, make sure you're subscribed, have a bit of a flick through some of my other videos, and you're welcome to give any feedback as well. I do enjoy getting feedback. Constructive feedback's always welcomed. I think I've implemented quite a few changes to the way I deliver things based on feedback from both friends and subscribers. So feel free to share your thoughts with me below.